Thank you for watching Honesty Unleashed with Hanky Q in the evenings, talking all things entertainment, politics, and religion, and of course, all things sports.
All right, everyone, welcome into another episode of Honesty Unleashed with Hanky Q. And today we have a very special guest that I would like to introduce, Jen Schultz. Jen, it's good to have you here. Do you remember the last time that I did meet you, or how long ago that was?
Yeah, I believe it was in 2022 when I was running for Congress the first time. And we were at the high school, and I was there for, I guess we would call it a meet and greet. And you were in the hallway, and you did a quick interview with me before I introduced myself to the people who attended the event.
Now, you haven't been back in quite a bit of time, so can you or I don't know, when was the last time you've been back?
We have been here a lot, actually, to
Oh,
Brainerd,
okay.
because Brainerd opened up a DFL, Democratic Farmer Labor office in Brainerd since 2022, and it's very active. So we've been here engaging with folks many, many times. We love coming to Brainerd. We were just here for a fundraiser a few weeks ago, in fact.
Wow. So as of today, what brings you here specifically, and what is your plans?
So tonight we have a meet and greet in Nisswa, and we're looking forward to that. We have over 100 people RSVP'd. Usually more will come. And this morning I took a tour of the We Are Clinic and at the Central Lakes College, their clinic for students. So I did a tour to find out what they're up to, what resources they need, how they're funded. For me, it's really about listening to what the needs are in the community. And then remembering those needs once I'm elected to come back and advocate for the community and services. And in my background is healthcare, and so I'm learning more about what healthcare services we need, especially in small communities.
So overall, how would you say that you were accepted, or how did you feel about what you were seeing, or just like the interaction with everyone there at the college?
Yeah, I think that they're excited that I was there, learning about all the great things they're doing and their hub model that they have to provide food services to address food insecurity, behavioral health, reproductive health. And so their model could be used at other colleges across the state and country. And this is what elected officials should be doing, is visiting in their communities and learning and developing legislation or funding to expand programs across the country or across the state.
So you had mentioned that obviously healthcare was something that you have done. But before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of, who you are, politician, et cetera, I do want to somewhat give people a little bit of an understanding of who Jen Schultz is, a little bit behind the scenes of being out there in the community and a politician. So if we kind of tell us a little bit, what was childhood, I guess, a little bit like growing up?
Yeah, so I'm from a very humble background. My grandfather came to America when he was 14. He immigrated from Holland. His mother had passed away. He came over with his siblings and his father, and they were poor. And in northern Holland, which is actually called Friesland, that one thing they valued was land, because they didn't have a lot of land there. They reclaimed it from the sea. So they came over to America, and they settled here. My grandmother's family is from Poland, a big Catholic family, but very, very poor, living in poverty situation. And my grandfather met my grandmother. This is so cliche, but he was the milkman. They got married young and had a big Catholic family. So my mother is from a large family. She was the first one in her family to go to college. My grandparents were very dependent on Social Security and Medicare. My grandmother sewed all the clothes for my mother and her siblings, and they only got one new outfit on Easter every year. But they had a dairy farm, and they were very self-sufficient. And then my mother married my father when she was young, and right after he returned from Vietnam, he signed up voluntarily to serve in Vietnam when he was 18. So he was a really young man, and that probably contributed to his PTSD from serving in Vietnam, and became addicted to alcohol to treat those symptoms. He passed away. Well, my parents got divorced a few years later, so I was really young. So my mother raised me and my older sister, and we did not have a lot of money either. She went back to school to get a college degree, and eventually to get a master's degree. And she became an alcohol and drug abuse counselor because of her experience with my father's alcoholism. And my father continued to drink, and I only saw my father 2 weeks every year. But he was, he was a loving dad, but because of his disease, it really impacted our relationship. And eventually he went into recovery. I admitted him to a treatment center that my mother worked at the time. And he went through treatment and became sober at age 55, but he passed away at age 60 from liver disease. He had a large tumor in his liver that was untreated. But my mother really struggled to take care of us and to pay for the bills. And we were very lucky that we had free lunch at school and that we had subsidized housing when we were young and she was back in school. If we didn't have those services, my mother would have never completed her degree and would never be able to help, provide for us food, clothing, shelter. I was lucky to get a student loan and a Pell Grant to go to college, but I started working at age 14, parking cars at the local county fair, like directing cars, not like valet parking, but like, here's where you go, standing out in the hot sun on my feet. It was the hardest job I've ever had.
What did that pay?
I don't remember, but I was 14. It was the only thing I could do at 14 back then. Probably very little, but, and then I was a waitress and worked at a grocery store. And I did that through college to pay my way, in addition to getting a student loan that I paid back and a small Pell Grant. And then I was lucky to get a scholarship from our local community for kids with needs, that didn't have a lot of financial help to go to college. So I was really fortunate. My sister had to take a few years off and go work as a nanny on the East Coast before she was able to go to college. And with both of us in college, that's when we qualified for federal FAFSA Pell Grant. So I really credit the government and taxpayers to making me successful, because then I went on to get a graduate degree in economics, and eventually now I teach economics at UMD.
So before we get into a little bit of that, you had talked about your dad coming back from war and being addicted to alcohol because of obviously all the horrible things that he's seen. But what was a job, if he did work, when you were kind of like growing up?
He did. Well, he was a firefighter. So as soon as he got back from Vietnam, he went through the training to become a firefighter, first responder, and paramedic, which is now like an EMT. He was a very smart man. And that was also stressful. So someone who's coming back from Vietnam to also be in stressful positions as a firefighter probably did not help his PTSD. But it was, he was a very strong, stubborn man. And so my mother knew it would take a while to get him to admit that he had a drinking problem and to get to go through recovery. But eventually he did. And when I was growing up, I went to Alateen. My mother learned about the impact of alcohol on people's families and their mental health. And so I felt very supportive. I went to the Al-Anon and AA meetings. We would go to these meetings at night where people would get pins for sobriety. And I would hear these stories of when they were abusing alcohol or drugs and what they did. That was a very good way to prevent your young teenagers from ever using drugs or getting involved, because those stories really scared me away from any drug use or alcohol use.
So I was going to ask as well, growing up in the household and seeing what your father was going through, that obviously kept you away from it. Did you ever try it? Did you ever think to yourself well, maybe just one taste?
No, I never did any sort of drugs in high school. I mean, we drank. I grew up in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and that's the home of Blonde and Kugel's Brewery. So, that was sort of the beer choice. But it's a small town. And what do kids do at night on the weekends is they have keg parties. And we did that. But I was very aware that my mother was a therapist at an alcohol and drug abuse treatment facility, L.E. Phillips Treatment Center. So I knew I could never get in trouble. So I often was a designated driver. And knew that it would hurt my mother's career potentially and our livelihood if I got into any trouble with alcohol or drugs. But hearing those stories is really what prevented me from ever wanting to use drugs, because I didn't want to get addicted.
So when you say that you only had seen your father, I think 2 times a year?
2 weeks per year.
2 weeks per year. what was the relationship like when you would go to visit him?
Yeah, he was, he loved us very much, me and my sister. And we would go on camping trips to northern Wisconsin. It was lovely. Although he was always, there were bars near the campground. So he was, always needing to drink, and he was a social drinker. So he liked to be around other people. He was not violent at all. And then I would see him at Christmas, and he loved Christmas, and it was a big deal for him, for his daughters to be with him over the holidays. And that was, the court decided on custody to my mom, and set the child support payments, which were at the time only $200 a month. It was not a lot of money for child support. But so yeah, I didn't see him a lot. He may have wanted to see us more. My mother worried every single day we were gone. I know that she didn't tell me that till later, but she said she worried every single day. Mm-hmm.
So there was only what was your sister's name?
My sister's name is Vicky, and she's 2 years older than me.
So just the two of you?
Just the two of us.
So during that time your dad was there but wasn't there, but then the divorce came about. How did that shape your life for the better or for the worse?
Well, it's probably healthy not to be in that situation where you have someone addicted, and I was so young when they got divorced that I don't remember much when I was a child and they
How
were
old?
married together. I was not even in school yet, so I was
okay.
just a toddler. But my mother then lived with one of her sisters who was also getting a divorce from her husband, who was also an alcoholic. And so we lived together for a while, this big family, two women and kids. Was just very supportive environment. And then a few years later, after my mother went through school and became a therapist, she remarried for a few years. And so I had a stepfather who was wonderful. That marriage didn't work out, but he was a good role model for a few years for me and my sister. So it was good for us. My father eventually got remarried as well, and he married another alcoholic, which did not help. Just sort of enabled him to drink more, because he could say, well, I'm not as bad as my wife who drinks. Yeah, and they were like drinking buddies, so they really just enabled each other. But my mother is a very strong, independent woman, and she is an organizer. And in the early 70s, she organized all the women in her circle to fight for women's rights, because, back then, a lot of young women don't know this today, but she couldn't get a credit card in her name. She couldn't get a mortgage. She needed my dad's signature to buy a car. It was very difficult, and she wanted to change things. And so even when she was married young and had two girls, she got the women engaged and active in politics. And she actually ran while she was still married to my father. She ran for a county clerk position. And in the 70s, she almost won. She didn't. She took on an
Probably
incumbent. Unheard of. And my father, I remember him telling me later that he would, the men around him at the fire station would tease him because his wife was, running for this office that was held by some other person. But so she was also engaged when we were older in the Equal Rights Amendment and feminism, and just working on equal rights for women so they could be independent and not need a signature from their husband for a credit card.
Were you guys a very close family, like when it came to like your sister and your mom, because of everything that you had been through?
Oh yes, we're still close to this day, very, very close. Mm-hmm.
So with saying that is what I was leading to, being such a close family and having someone to have to lean on to. What was that like for you to have to eventually break off and go to college and kind of do your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, we were always together, I guess. True, and we were. When we were young and my mother started working, I don't know if they use this term anymore today, but we were latchkey kids. So I wore a key on a necklace around my neck under my shirt. And we were in grade school. We would walk home, my sister and I together, and my mother wasn't home. And we were in an apartment complex, and there were a lot of young mothers there with kids. And it was really a community, a very supportive community. And but I remember being teased for having that key around my neck and being poor and not wearing nice clothes. And but my mother, as a strong woman, she just told us, don't worry about what other people think. Just do your work, do well in school, and everything will work out for you. She's also a very optimistic woman and has a lot of faith and hope. And that was maybe part of her Catholic faith. She was really upset with the Catholic Church after the divorce because they refused to annul the marriage. And so she turned away from the Catholic Church for a while and tried other different religions. But now it came back to the church and has a lot of faith. And I think she needs that now, given politically what's happening in this world.
Growing up Catholic and obviously taking a different route like your mother did, how did that shape your religion?
Yeah, so I remember going to Catholic church with her when I was young, and I decided I had to stop going to school, Catholicism, CCD is what we called it, and church, because I wanted to raise my hand and ask the priest questions.
Which is
I didn't agree with everything the priest was saying, and I told my mother this, and of course she was really sad, but understood that I'm not.
A little bit probably like her.
Yeah, maybe, and I just stopped going to Catholic church for a long time in my life, and tried other religions and other things of faith and spirituality. I've tried to find spirituality in other things, not the Catholic Church. But I understand the importance of organized religion in people's lives, and I see the value in it.
So you leave home, and it's college time. How did you decide what you wanted to study or major in, or think of like, this is going to be my career one day?
Yeah, well, I loved learning. I love to learn about everything. So it was very difficult to pick a major and decide what I wanted to do in my life. And because I was just a straight A student. I got A's, and because I like to learn and I like to read.
Can't relate with you on that one, but I'm happy for you.
I like to read, and I think more than anything, I didn't want to disappoint my teachers. And so I always wanted to be prepared. And I was a shy young person and an introvert, but so I just had a lot of time to read as well. But I had a female professor of economics, and at the time there just weren't that many women in economics. And she said, Jen, we need more women in economics. And so that right there, that one statement said, okay, I'm going to go into economics because we need more representation. And I never regretted that, because in economics, you can go into any field. There's other subfields. You can go work in the government or the private sector or for nonprofits. So there's a lot of flexibility. And I decided to pursue a graduate degree in economics and learn more, and really try to dismantle a lot of the assumptions that economists make about the value of things like working from home, childcare, a lot of the things that we exclude from how we monetize our economy and capitalism. In fact, I took the first course offered across the country called Feminist Economics to have more perspective from women and how what we measure matters and what we're not measuring matters, and the assumptions we make matter, and try to really make the field stronger and more inclusive.
So, did you graduate with that degree?
Yes, I have a master's degree in economics, and I have a PhD. I decided when I was getting my master's degree, I wanted to do healthcare economics. And so I entered a PhD program in the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota called Health Services Research. That's because at the time, health economics was just a new area for economists to go into. And that's where a lot of the health economists were, at the University of Minnesota. So I transferred into that program and worked and finished a PhD in health economics.
Wow. So what was the first job once you were done with school, and then it's like, I'm an adult now, I've really got to get my act together? What was the first job you applied for? Was it like internships? What were you doing after college had kind of ended?
Well, I took out loans to pay for graduate school, and I got some stipend being a research associate while I was a graduate student, but living on pennies. I would have pennies to my name, and this was true. Even in college, I would have one meal a day. I was working too. I was not eating well because I was poor. I was just a poor student most of my life. And so in the summer, while I was at grad school, I went and worked for a pharmaceutical company in the summer in Chicago, northern suburbs of Chicago. It was a great experience. I learned that I did not want to do that after I graduated, but I was on the research side of it. So I was looking at the impact of like noncompliance with medications. And I was put into the group, I was on the research side, but I was put into the group of all of the folks at market and the sales group, that they're interns, and they were just wined and dined. They got free shows to Broadway and, the Broadway shows, the musicals, and it was fun to be with that group. I mean, literally, the pharmaceutical company paid a limo to take the interns out. It was very nice. I realized they have a lot of money. But, we were charging these exorbitant prices for drugs. So I knew I did not want to do that. I wanted to really be an advocate and fix healthcare.
They were being charged way up above than that they ever needed to be.
Pharmaceutical companies, the prices for drugs is very high.
Oh, yeah.
The marginal cost of producing one more drug once the research and development already exists is very cheap to produce drugs once you've done the R&D. And most of that research and development is done at R1 academic research universities. And so pharma companies often buy that patent for that drug and then market and sell it. It's what the value they're adding.
Maybe you don't know this, but if someone such as myself has some type of health problems, let's say I need insulin or whatever the case may be, what does that, I guess, hypothetically look like price-wise when they get it and then when it's sold to me who needs it?
Yeah, so in Minnesota, we capped what you pay for insulin. We were one of the early states to do that, and then the federal government did that in Medicare. And so this is a drug you need to live. If you have diabetes, this is a drug. If you don't have it, you die. And that happened in Minnesota. A young man couldn't afford his insulin, and he died because he only didn't have enough. And so we wanted to prevent any future deaths from not having medication. And so the government came in and said to the pharmaceutical companies, you can't charge more than this. But there are drugs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to treat things like Parkinson's. And people just cannot afford that. And it's an issue. People should, it shouldn't be based on your ability to pay. Everyone should have access to life-saving drugs and medications to be healthy.
Would you say that the majority of diseases and problems that people have, there's something to cure it or to help them out, but it's just unfortunate that, they don't have the money. I don't have the money. So therefore it's like, well, you don't fit in this class system. So then you're not going to be able to get it.
We are the only the wealthiest country. All of our other wealthy countries have figured out how to do this, have figured out how to get people health care, even regardless of their income. And so we have to continue to improve our healthcare quote system so more people can have access to affordable health care, that everyone has access to health care. And, the Affordable Care Act was a wonderful start, and we need to build off of that to expand affordable coverage, but also to reduce our growth in healthcare costs, because a high percentage of everyone's wages now are going for health care, and it's not sustainable, and we have to change that. And that means we have to figure out how to reduce our spending on health care and just the high prices that are charged.
So with you being a politician and me being someone who's on the outside is saying, this is a chance to say, okay, I want to ask this question, but it seems logical to where you would say the American people need X, Y, and Z for living expenses, just life in general. And when it comes to, pills, et cetera, within like the health department, why is it so hard for politicians to come together and to say, all right, let's make it affordable for them?
Well, this is just happened. Medicare is allowed to negotiate drug prices for 10 drugs. And those prices were just posted. And it took a lot to get there. And I will tell you why. It's because we don't have campaign finance reform. So these corporate interests spend a lot of money lobbying, but also contributing to campaigns. So those politicians can win re-election or win office by not reforming drug prices or reforming health care. So we have to take the money out of politics, out of campaigns. So the first people ask, well, Jen, when you get elected, what's the first thing you're going to do? And I say, well, I'm going to build relationships first and get everyone's cell phone number and make sure I can pass things because I have relationships with so many other elected officials. But the second thing is we need campaign finance reform. We cannot move forward on healthcare reform or tax fairness if we don't take the money out of the campaigns.
And what is preventing that from happening?
Lack of will for those who are there, because they know that if they want to get reelected to fund their campaign, because it costs millions of dollars even to run for Congress, millions, that they rely on those donations and that PAC money from corporate interests, which is really unfortunate. So we have to basically say, we're not going to allow individuals to spend as much money on campaigns. We're going to shorten the election period, right, where they can spend money on campaigns. We're going to not allow independent expenditures to come in and buy these elections. There just has to be a lot more structure and restrictions. And other countries have figured out how to do this. We have to get to that point as well.
Okay, so we talked a little about policies. We're going to continue to get into that, but you talk about your first job, internship, going into Chicago and seeing kind of like how they get fine wined and dined. During that period of time, are you boyfriend? Like, what's that kind of looking like? Are you moving on to the next step of the job? Like, what's after that, the internship?
Yeah, so I was very focused on school, and what was very different. So when I was getting my graduate degree in just straight economics, I was there were only I think I was the only female in my class of all men getting a degree in economics. So going to school public health, I met all these wonderful, strong women, and they're my friends for life. And it was so nice to be around so many strong women again, and not just men. And so I built those relationships, focused on school. We went out all the time. I did not have a boyfriend in graduate school. I was very, very busy learning how to do research and making a difference. But my first job was a faculty position at Cornell in upstate New York in Ithaca. So I finished my PhD. I went out east, did that for a few years. I was teaching a class when 9/11 happened, and a lot of my students were from New York, and they had family members calling them on their cell phone. It was just really traumatic. My father had been diagnosed with liver disease, and it was terminal. So my sister and I just decided we need to move home, and we need to be with our dad while he was in hospice. He was in hospice at the VA in Minneapolis. So my sister was living in Ohio at the time. I maybe wasn't thinking rationally, but I resigned from my tenure track position at Cornell. And my sister left her job, and we moved to Minneapolis. I called up my friends. I said, I need a job, and took a job at United Health Group, a subsidiary called Ingenix, which is basically Optum now, and did research for United Health Group Optum on healthcare policy. And the week that I was moving back, I met my husband, who is now my husband, and he had just accepted a faculty position at the University of Minnesota Duluth. He's a criminologist.
Oh, okay.
And statistician. And we dated for 3 months before he told me that he'd be moving to Duluth. I think he didn't want me to say, I don't want to do a long distance relationship, right. But really lucky to have met him. And now we have two teenage boys. We both teach at UMD. We have a wonderful family, and it was one of the best things I've ever did was get married to my husband and have 2 kids. And
how long have you been married for?
We just celebrated our 20-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
August 14th is our anniversary. So I can't believe that it's been that long, but it has. And we're very happy. And actually, classes for UMD just started today. So my husband's back in the classroom teaching.
So just for fun, what was that encounter like when you met him, or how did you guys get paired together to eventually start a relationship?
Yeah, I was I sold all of my stuff in upstate New York. I didn't have a lot, and put everything in my car and just moved back. And so I was renting and needed furniture, and I was at the Room and Board outlet. I think it's Roseville in the Twin Cities. And you have people go there, there's long lines to wait to get in once it opens to the outlet, because you can get very discounted furniture there. And I'm a frugal person. And so he happened to be there, and I still had my license plates from New York on my car. And he had gone to Rutgers and lived in New York City for a few years working on his graduate degree. And so we just sparked up a conversation, and that's how we met. And then we went on some dates, and that was it. I think we kind of knew that, we were older, and had dated other people and just kind of knew it was right.
With you saying that, you were kind of frugal at times, and obviously when it comes to dating, it can be nerve-wracking because it's like, oh, now I got to take her or him on this date, go out. So was it something extravagant, or did you guys just kind of like agree to go on something small? And
Well, I was living in South Minneapolis at the time, and we walked around one of the lakes. I think it
Something
was
simple
Lake Harriet. It was very cheap. Yes, because I had a ton of student debt to pay off, and so did he. So we didn't have a lot of money. We had small apartments in near Uptown, and it was a very cheap date.
hey, well, it worked out, so you're here to tell about it, and that's all that matters. Moving on to when the date, your dating, etc., jobs. When was it that you first decided, like, hey, I need to throw my ring in the hat of politics?
Boy, so let's see. I was teaching at the time, and I was working in Duluth, and I was involved in sort of the healthcare reform circles in Duluth, a group of advocates. And at the time, it was Tom Huntley was the state legislator for Duluth. He'd been there for 20-some years, and I worked with him pretty closely on health policy at the state level. And he decided he was going to retire after 22 years. And my husband and our kids were pretty young at the time. And I was at I'm in a union, Education Minnesota, University Education Association, Duluth, and I was at a Education Minnesota meeting down in St. Paul, and they were talking about recruiting someone to run for Tom Huntley's seat, and I had never run for office before. It was never on my bucket list at all. I was happy being behind the scenes, working on policy. And I came home and told my husband about it, and he's like, "Oh, you should run, right?
Oh, wow.
Or you should run." And I never even thought. I thought, oh, if I asked him, I really would have thought he would have said no. Our kids are too young.
Well, yeah, that's
There's
one
just-
thing I was asking to say. Was your husband excited for you, or was he did you have to pull him along? But that's
No,
pretty
he
awesome.
was super excited, and we're both working full time and having 2 kids, and luckily there was a really good child care center at the university, which was fairly new. Like when I never thought I was going to have kids. It was just never something that I thought I would be able to do, afford, and my husband, we got married thinking we would not have children. And then we were living in Duluth, and we said, okay, let's get a dog and see if we can manage time, because we're both working on tenure. So it's a lot of research. You're in the office a lot. And we adopted a dog, and we did pretty well with this dog. He was like our baby. And,
What kind?
It was a mixed dog. No, and we adopted him from a foster program because someone had abandoned him. But if he was lying down, he looks like a yellow lab. But as soon as he stood up, he had short little legs. And his name was Chester. And he was adorable. And we thought we did really well. And we thought, oh, a baby would be easier because we could at least take a baby to a restaurant. Because at the time, now there's more dog-friendly places. But at the time, there wasn't. So we decided, we thought we were ready to have kids. And we had kids. And we were, really fortunate that all of that went well, even though I was an older mom. And when the time came, you never know what's going to fall in your lap. And so when I was approached about running for office, I really wasn't that tied into politics in the Duluth community yet. But a lot of people knew me because I was working on health policy reform, some circles of advocates. And so my husband was really supportive. I couldn't have done what I did without his support, because he became a single parent for a while I was campaigning, or when I did eventually win and became a state legislator for 8 years. And I had to be in St. Paul for a session which runs from January and through May, Monday through Friday. So he luckily is very good at grocery shopping and doing the laundry and doing the dishes and cleaning. He does not like to cook. That was one problem.
If not, he definitely learned.
There's still a lot for him to learn, but he knows how to use the microwave for sure. So we managed, and it went by really fast, but it was one, having kids was the most rewarding thing I've done, but the second most rewarding thing is being a public servant and being a state legislator for 8 years and working on improving people's lives. that is rewarding because you're doing that for not just people in the district you represent, but across the whole state.
For some people who may just, look at a TV screen and eventually just see you as X, Y, and Z with your name, what does that process look like when it comes to jumping into a race? So you kind of explained to us about, okay, your husband was on board, which is a key factor in all of it. But what does that process kind of look like when it comes to, the long hours, the traveling, I don't know, the money, the people you need on your team to help advocate for you and to reach out, all that type of stuff?
Well, I ran as a DFL candidate. I was endorsed. That endorsement process was long. I didn't, when I decided to run, I didn't know there were like 4 other people that had been already working on, wanting to do this. And so it was a very contested endorsement fight. And it went to like 8 ballots, but you probably don't need to know the details. But once you get in Duluth, because it's progressive, it's really getting that DFL endorsement is really important. And then no one primaried me, and I won fairly easily. But you don't have a lot of money in these state legislative races. I mean, you don't need to raise that much money to win, and so it's all volunteer staff. So I was lucky that a professor had just retired, and she became my campaign manager as a volunteer, and she was so organized and knew how to get through the endorsement and win. So I was really grateful to have her support. And her name's Eileen Zeitz Huddleston, and she's still with us today doing some volunteer work for my congressional campaign. So she was my campaign manager for the entire 8 years I was a state legislator, and we had a huge group of volunteers that would hand write letters to the delegates saying why they supported me.
You had a good team then.
It was amazing. It was total old school politics. This is how you do a grassroots campaign. I door knocked every street in my district. I door by myself. We had volunteers go out too, but I did every door in my district, every street. And I had this huge map on the wall, and I would just highlight every street after doing it. But you get out there, you show up on someone's doorstep, they're going to vote for you, but you also listen to their concerns, and they know you care because you're there.
Helps build a relationship and have a stronger connection, knowing that you're just not a person that's talking on camera, or there's getting these pamphlets, but it's like, oh, she took the time to come to my place. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Whether they're for you or not, I think that still speaks volumes in my opinion. While you did that for 8 years, what is, or even now, and what you've been able to do, what is one of your happiest and the biggest accomplishment you're most proud of?
Yeah, so I'm a policy geek. I'm just a nerd, I've always been a nerd. And I really cared about, one of my priorities was healthcare reform. And so I wanted to be on Health and Human Services committees. And at the time when I got into office, I was in the minority. So the Republicans controlled the House and the Democrats controlled the Senate. And I was going into the Minnesota House. And when you're in the minority, you just don't have a lot of power to get your bills through the process. So the first bill I worked on was a Republican-led bill. I was the only Democrat. And it was for covering telemedicine, telehealth. And this was, before the pandemic. But I knew in rural areas in the state, they were desperate for this. So I championed that and worked across the aisle and continued that bipartisan work. Most of my bills, 80% of my bills had Republican co-sponsors, because my whole 8-year career was divided government. It wasn't this trifecta that we have now. To get anything passed, I had to have Republican support. I'm most proud of is that I had a constituent who could not get affordable coverage because when the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, passed, also known as Obamacare, affordability of premiums was based on one person, the employee's coverage premium. Most people who have families put their whole family on their health insurance through their employer. And those premiums are a lot higher, but that's not how we base affordability on it, was the total family premium. So I wanted to fix that. It's called the family glitch. And at the time, Republicans were really bashing the ACA. They did not like it. They campaigned against it. They tried almost 100 times to repeal it at the federal level. So through a Republican-controlled Senate, I passed this fix of the family glitch, improving the ACA in Minnesota. So we defined affordability that if your family coverage exceeded more than 8% of your income, you would be eligible for the Minnesota Care product, which was an affordable based policy. So it was a huge deal, and it passed with Republican support. I still don't really know, like, did they know what they're, I'm like, but I think they realized that a lot of their constituents would benefit from it, honestly, even though they didn't like the ACA. And now it's very popular and it has very high favorability, the ACA, because people figured out what it was. It was affordable health coverage. And so expanding that was a big deal. It was probably something that was a big accomplishment that I don't know if everyone could do. And then the second biggest thing I did, which also took a lot of work, was Minnesota was the only state at the time that did not license assisted living facilities. And we saw a lot of abuse, some deaths, in poorly managed assisted living facilities. And so my goal was to get them licensed and regulated and make sure everyone would have the comfort knowing that their loved one was getting the best quality care. So we did that in Minnesota too. And that was a big effort because the long-term care industry was very powerful and had a lot of money and was opposed to it.
Now that you're here again and you've kind of been back and forth and stuff like that, if you could kind of explain a little bit your agenda and some of the policies that you will be running against Pete Stauber, correct? And what that is going to look like for someone to vote for you, or like what your main agenda is. So explain your position and why you were running.
So I was chair of a human services committee during the pandemic. It was a lot of work. It was very stressful. So in 2022, I decided to retire from the state legislature. That I had done 8 years of public service. I was very happy with what I did. It was very rewarding, but decided to retire. And we were trying to recruit someone to run for Congress, U.S. Congress. This is the U.S. House of Representatives at the federal level where they would serve in D.C. We could not recruit anyone to run against Pete Stauber. And it was pretty late in the cycle, and it was late spring, and I just decided, well, I'm retiring. I've got nothing to lose. I'll do it. No one else was going to do it. So I stepped into that race in 2022 with a very limited time, very limited money, and a very small campaign team. And really, it's when you decide to run for Congress, usually you know 2 years in advance before you put your hat in the ring. But we did really well. We got 43% of the vote, which was a big deal in this district. That was trending, was red, and Pete Stauber was the incumbent and had been there since 2018. And we were endorsed by 7 of the largest conservative newspapers in the district, Forum Communications. And it was like a glowing endorsement of me because I had this long track record of getting things done for the community, our community. And it was very negative on Pete Stauber because he hadn't done anything. He's what he does still to this day is he blames and complains, and he uses fear to get people to vote for him. And it's very toxic and it's very divisive. And
can I ask real quick, when you mean, or when you talk about like fear, like I guess just give us one example.
Well, he makes them fearful of undocumented non-citizens, right? He talks a lot about border security and immigration, which I agree we need to reform our asylum process. We need border security. He talks about fentanyl coming over the border and blames undocumented non-citizens when it's really 91% of all the fentanyl coming in, it's coming in from American citizens. So you got to have your facts straight because he misinforms the public. And so he makes people fearful of crime. My husband's a criminologist, so crime is actually going down. I care about public safety and community safety, and we need to fund the police. And he's a former police officer. So he makes people fearful of not wanting to go to the Twin Cities because crime is out of control. Well, there's been carjackings, but those are coming down too. And our state is pretty safe compared to other communities. And then he blames and complains the Biden-Harris administration, the Walz, our governor, and he doesn't realize that he's in a position of power in Congress to solve all the things he's talking about. And he doesn't do anything. He's only passed 2 of his bills have passed into law. He named a post office, and then he created a task force. So he's, in his 6 years in Congress, he's done almost nothing. He doesn't know how to work across the aisle. I learned that no one knows who he is. He's a backbencher because he's not doing anything there. He gets a very good paycheck, like $175,000 a year. He qualifies for the congressional pension. And he's not doing anything for the community. And this district is large. It's the size of the state of West Virginia. It goes all the way up from Lake of the Woods includes Bemidji and then Brainerd, of course. And it goes all the way down to north of Stillwater and comes all the way up, includes Hugo, Forest Lake, Taylor's Falls, Duluth, and the North Shore. So it's a very large district. And they remember former Congressman Jim Oberstar. And Jim Oberstar was the chair of the Transportation Committee and brought in huge investments to this district. And that's what people want again. They want folks to invest in the infrastructure. And Pete Stauber voted against the largest infrastructure bill in history. And we were getting $1 billion from that for the Blotnick Bridge, but lots of other projects. People do not want streets lined with potholes because it wrecks their car. It's an expense for them, right?
That's for sure.
They want broadband. They want their lead pipes replaced, and they want good airports throughout the district. And that bill funded all of those things, and he voted no. And what really upset a lot of people is then he took credit for those projects that he voted against. And that was upsetting for people to hear him lie about what he actually accomplished. And I tell people, well, when you don't do anything, you have to take credit for other people's work. And that's exactly what he's been doing. So I decided to run again, and I've got a big team, more time, and more money. And there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm. And we believe we can win in November.
Now, I don't want to harp on Mr. Stauber because obviously he's not here to defend himself. Hopefully I'll get a chance to maybe have him on here one day. But I just want to come to two more questions about him. One, if we're having a rational conversation with him, what is one thing that you would like to say to him respectfully by saying, this is what I would love for you to change if you're going to continue to be in your position of power?
Yeah, well, first of all, he should show up. So right now he doesn't do any in-person town hall meetings. He does these telephone town hall meetings. You may find out about them, you may not. And so he's not listening to constituents. In fact, I was approached by a group of high school students that went out to D.C. to meet with him, and he did not show up. And so they contacted me afterwards, and I met with them, but they felt really bad because all the other high school students they were with were meeting with their congressperson, and they had it scheduled. And that's more common. I'm hearing other stories like that. So he needs to show up. That's the basic job. Show up to listen to your voters, your constituents, to see what they need. And then go do those things when you're in Congress. And he's not doing that either. And so the first thing I would say is show up, listen to your constituents, and try to help them and improve people's lives. His logo is protecting our way of life. People don't want to go backwards. They want to go forward. They want a better way of life. And he hasn't been doing that, and it's really unfortunate. And then the second thing advice I would give him is stop using fear. Stop blaming others. Take responsibility, accountability. And when you send out email newsletters, put in there what is happening in Congress. What bills are you working on? What have you accomplished? Instead of spreading these lies and fear and divisiveness, because we're so polarized in this country. We need leaders that will bring people back together. We need to unify this country. We need to act as a team because there are a lot of big issues that our world is going to be facing, and we can't be divided to face those big issues that are coming, like global warming, lack of water, global migration, big picture things that he's not going to be able to solve.
Now, you had talked about, and I feel as it comes a lot from the Democrats of saying, we're here to unify. We're not just, here to serve the Democrats, but we're here to serve the Republicans too. So with that being said, I know this may be very hard in some ways, but I would like, if possible, is there anything nice or something that you say, hey, I got a lot of things that I would like him to change, but there is one thing that I can say he does this well, or I respect him for it?
Well, he's a nice guy. I worked with him. I was a Great Lakes commissioner for 8 years. He was St. Louis County commissioner. I was a state legislator. So had meetings with him. I worked with him on things, and he's not a bad guy. He's just a bad leader. So, this maybe isn't his calling, being in Congress. A lot of people like the power and the title, but the work is really hard if you do it well. You're flying back and forth. You have a huge district to cover. You need a lot of energy and a reason why you're there, a good reason why you're there to motivate and to help people. And I don't know if those are the reasons why he is there.
As a politician and running as a Democrat, for the people who do know you, but also the people that don't know you and maybe just a little bit on the fence, what is your message to them to say that I'm here for you, but not just saying it? What are you backing that up with?
Yeah, so I have driven all over this district. Just in 2022, in the few months I was running, I put on over 30,000 miles on my car because it's a large district. I wanted to learn as much as I can about what the community needed. And I have a track record. I have a 100% pro-labor voting record. I am all about helping working families. I'm from a working family. I was very poor, so I know what it's like to struggle. And I am very dedicated my life to public service. As a teacher, as a state legislator, I know how to get things done and solve problems. You could ask Republicans, anyone down at the Capitol about me, they would say, "Yeah, Jen gets shit done. She solves problems," because that's how they knew of me, right? And Governor Walz kicked off our campaign this year, and we didn't always agree on stuff. We disagreed on stuff, and he admitted that. And then he also said, but her heart's in the right place. She works hard. She knows how to solve problems, and she's a pretty smart person. And you need all of those characteristics. And I would tell people, vote in their best interest. Vote for someone who you think is going to work hard for you, and not corporations, not corporate interests, but for you and your family and your community. And I think we've lost that in a lot of elected officials. They forget why they're there and who they represent. And people need to use their power to vote. They need to investigate and educate themselves, because who you elect matters. It really does. Your vote matters. Some of these Minnesota House races were won by a few hundred votes, some by less, 15. So your vote matters, and who you send to office matters. And so I hope they spend time investigating what the individual, their record, and forget about what some politicians say. Go look at what they do, because people don't trust a lot. They've lost a lot of trust in elected officials and our institutions, which is really unfortunate. We need to build that trust back up.
If you win on day one, what does that look like?
I haven't really, I'm very focused on the campaign right now, but when I'm elected on November 5th, the day after, you wouldn't take office till January, but you start, first of all, thanking everyone that helped you. We have thousands of volunteers signed up, and they're doing a lot of different things. You thank everybody. And then you go back and you find out what are the priorities going to be. You need to go back and ask folks in the community, what's your top 3 priorities? What do you want your congressperson to do for you in D.C.? You gather all of that information. And like I said before, you start building those relationships even before you go to D.C. And you hire the right people. You have people that you want in your district full time, helping with constituent services. And in this district, we have 7 of the 11 tribes. So after redistricting happened, 7 of the 11 tribes are now in the 8th district. And so, I've been building relationships with all of the tribes, and having a tribal liaison, on your official side, which Stauber doesn't have, to work on tribal sovereignty and treaty rights, and to advocate for their health services, for housing, all of the issues, wastewater treatment that they need on the reservations is really important. So it's been very, contentious between Pete Stauber and tribes, and we need to build all of those relationships again.
Last question. What is the advice that you would give other people who want to be in your position one day?
Well, I just tell people to have perseverance, like never give up, right? I talked to a lot of people that wouldn't run for Congress against Pete Stauber because they told me they didn't want to lose. And I tell them it's not about winning or losing. It's holding people accountable that are in power. And you just have to fight for what you know is right and never give up. So I would say perseverance is very important. And having confidence. You have to build up your confidence and have hopefully other people help you build that confidence up. I think that would be my advice for what I've learned in my life to date.
Last but not least, what would you like to add, if anything, to this podcast, and just for someone to know about you, how to find you, what they can be doing to support you?
Well, unfortunately, because we don't have campaign finance for reform yet, it takes a lot of money to run in the 8th Congressional District because we're in 4 different media markets, including the Twin Cities. And a lot of people are not engaged. They don't know that I'm running. If you're not on Facebook and Twitter, you may have never even heard of my name if you're not reading the local paper, right? You're not that engaged. So to educate people, we have to use all forms of communication: radio, TV, digital streaming, internet ads on social media presence. I have to have a staff. We door knock, we lit drop, we do meet and greets, and it takes a lot of money. And I am not taking, big corporate PAC money like my opponent who, I think this cycle alone, he raised $750,000 or more from corporate PAC money, which is a lot. We need people to donate what they can. We have individuals on fixed income who are retired who donate $5 a month. But we need individuals to donate what they can to this race if they want to win. And we need people to volunteer and come out and door knock, especially now, and or phone bank, or write postcards so they can sign up at our website at Jen Schultz, SCHULTZ, JenSchultz4Congress.com. And they can also reach out to me. I always give out my cell phone number. It's surprising how few people actually use it. But my cell phone number is 218-340-5686. I even this year had business cards printed up. I hand those out at all the parades that we've been in. There's over, probably close to 100 parades in the 8th District. We've been in a lot of them. And I want to make sure people know how to reach their elected official once I'm elected. That'll be my cell phone number too, and they can always reach out.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming out and just being on the podcast and being laid back and letting people see a little bit behind the scenes of who you are. So I appreciate that, and best of luck in your race.
And thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching a Yes Sirski production. And don't forget to like and subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Yes Sirski!